Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head down to Brazil once again, and we're going to have a look at yet another of the Brazilian beers that I bought from Beer Dome down in the Netherlands. So, as I've told you in my previous Brazilian reviews, I've been highly impressed with the standard of craft beer that I've had out of Brazil so far. It's really nice to see that some of the breweries are starting to export their beers over here to Europe, and I hope that we see more of them making their way over here, and I also hope that we can get some beers from some of the other Latin American countries as well. It's always nice to try new things from new places. I've long heard that Brazil had a very strong craft beer scene, and it seems to be true actually. So if you get the chance to try some Brazilian beers, I highly recommend that you do. And Beer Dome in the Netherlands seems to be the place to get a hold of these things from. They've got a great selection on there, so do check them out. But yeah, for this review then, we are going to have a look at a gypsy brewery that I've never tried anything from. These guys are based between Rio de Janeiro and Belo Horizonte, and they do some interesting beers. So yeah, for this one, we are going to have a look at my first beer from Cervejaria Octopus. This one is called the Black Eyed Dog. It comes in at 10% ABV, and this one is an Imperial Stout with Cocoa Nibs and Vanilla added into the brew. So yeah, really curious to see how this one turns out. I've had a couple of beers from gypsy breweries in Brazil now, but as I say, the general standard of the things that we've had from Brazil over here in Europe has been very high. So I do have high hopes for this one, so hopefully it's an interesting beer. I hope that you guys enjoy my take on it, and we'll see how we get on. So yeah, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that hopefully I can do in the future from Cervejaria Octopus. This is the very first time I'm trying one of their beers, as I mentioned, but hopefully not the last. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlist of beers from different countries. There is one there for the Brazilian beers that I've reviewed for you. That's being added to whenever I get the opportunity, and I'm sure we'll continue to add to it gradually over time. But as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, on to my brewery notes then, to tell you a little bit about Cervejaria Octopus. And I do apologise for any bad Portuguese pronunciations in this video. It's a language that I am not very familiar with at all. But anyway, as I've mentioned to you already, Cervejaria Octopus are a gypsy brewery based between Rio de Janeiro and Belo Horizonte, and the company was established back in 2016. So the three men behind the company are Pedro Fernandes Diaz, Paulo Victor Totola, and Vitor Leandro Fontes. And these guys are long-term friends from what I understand. They've been beer enthusiasts and they started home brewing together, and it's just kind of evolved from there. But Vitor runs the administrative side of the company from Belo Horizonte, while Pedro runs a second base in Rio, where they've got a small experimental brewery, and this is where they develop all of their recipes, and some of the distribution and things is managed from there as well. But I believe the main operations these days are run from Belo Horizonte, actually. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that they've got people in two different places, but both of these cities, of course, are in the southern part of Brazil. But these days it seems that they've moved most of their operations to Belo Horizonte, and they brew a number of their beers at Cervejaria Octopus, which is in Minas Gerais, actually the state of Belo Horizonte. I believe Belo Horizonte is the capital of Minas Gerais, actually. But the ethos of this company is one of the really interesting things about it. So the company motto is music, nature, love and beer. So they do a lot to actually support these things. So they aim to be carbon neutral, and they do a lot of recycling, and they've got tree planting initiatives through their Carbono Zero project that they started in 2017. I believe it's Vitor who used to be a forestry engineer, which is kind of interesting. But they've also got a high number of women in their team, and they've participated in many of the different collaborations such as Black is Beautiful, All Together Now, and a few others. But this inspired them to start Project Love, which is a massive collaboration among breweries in Brazil who release special beers to support the LGBT, the gay rights people and groups and things like this, which I think is a very good cause, of course. But they also support a number of local music artists as well. So there you have music, nature, love and beer. all in one, and of course, yeah, they brew their beers that they enjoy. But the artwork on the beers is very distinctive. It's designed by Walter Costa, who has been with the company since 2018, and as of August 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, they've produced around 75 different kinds of beer. When I had a little look through the Untappd list, there was various different styles, and there are a lot of New England IPAs, a few West Coasters as well. I spied a few Belgian ales, and there were quite a few Imperial Stouts and things like that. I'm not sure if I saw any kind of sour beers right enough, but yeah, these guys seem to have a wide array of different styles that they do, and so 75 different beers so far is pretty impressive. But yeah, like I say, for the moment these guys are a gypsy brewery, but apparently there are plans to try and settle somewhere and get their own premises at some point in the future. So look forward to that happening, and I do look forward to being able to try a few more beers from these guys at some point in the future. But yeah, that is all I can really tell you about Cervejaria Octopus for the moment. There wasn't too much available on the founders, actually. I was trying to rake around and find things on the founders, but it was only really Vitor who I was able to find out about being a forestry engineer. So yeah, hopefully we can add a little bit to the notes at some point in the future, but I think that will do it for just now. But yeah, really interesting company, these guys, and another gypsy brewery, of course, from Brazil. So yeah, if you want to learn more about this brewery, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out their Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, that is it for the moment. Let's crack on and have a taste of this beer then. So I'll just let you have a little look at the artwork on this one before we open it up, because it is very distinctive. There you can see Walter's designs, which I think are pretty special actually. If you look through the Untappd page, you'll see that they are really quite cool. They're a little bit, like sort of some retro power metal albums that I've encountered. If you think like some of the things you'll see from Stradivarius back in the day and things like that, that's what some of his artwork really reminds me of. But yeah, this one incidentally is a 473ml can, 1 American pint, and I think I paid about €8 or €9 for this beer. So remember, when it comes to the Brazilian beers in Europe, there is no trade deal between Mercosul and the European Union, so you will have to pay, you do pay tariffs and things on these beers, which makes them a little bit more expensive. But you're getting a good quality beer, and there's also the novelty of trying something a little bit different. So I think it was about €9 for this beer, so that's roughly about £8 sterling, somewhere in the region of yeah, somewhere in the region of about $10 American for this. But for a 10% Imperial Stout, it's no too bad. It's no too bad. But there you can see on the side, there is the Octopus Brewing Company symbol, which I think is very nice. And then you also have the Music Nature Beer thing on the side here as well. So yeah, pretty awesome, I have to say. So without further ado, we'll get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting. The Black Eyed Dog, a 10% Imperial Stout with Cocoa Nibs from Bahia and Madagascan Vanilla. So yeah, looking forward to this. Always cool to review some more Brazilian beers for you here on the channel as well. And the Imperial Stouts that I've had have been very, very impressive, of course. I've really enjoyed those. But yeah, let's see how we go with this. Just look at the pour on that. That is mental. Absolutely crazy. This is the thing, you would think that with Brazil being a very, very hot country, they wouldn't be massively into these big, thick beers, but, they're some of the thickest Imperial Stouts you'll find, I think. But anyway, before the head disappears from this one, you can see this beer's poured with just under a half finger, somewhere between a 1/3 and a half finger of a frothy, very, very dark tan head. There's 1 or 2 big bubbles sticking towards the side of this one, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of the head there, but you can see this beer is absolutely black as night. This one has very little light coming through it, actually. Even when you shine the light through it, you don't get much of a kind of Coca-Cola, Pepsi coloured edge to it, actually, which you often get with these Imperial Stouts. But yeah, this one is pretty much as black as you're going to get. So yeah, in terms of its colour, then I would say dark ebony rosewood. Remember, the colour of your beer depends on 1, the type of malts that you use. This determines the magnitude of the colour of your beer, of course. 2, the length of your wort boil. The longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. And yeah, any adjuncts you add in any barrel aging that you do will also affect the colour of the beer too. But when it comes to Imperial Stouts and I guess IPAs, You know, it's those two factors you don't really have to consider. Those two tend to be more for sour beers and things. But yeah, this is one of the darkest Imperial Stouts I can say that I've seen. So this one probably will undergo a very long wort boil actually. You know, these big Imperial Stouts will undergo wort boils of like 4, 5, 6 hours, sometimes even longer than that. But yeah, you can tell from the pour in this one, this is a big thick beast. It's maybe even a double or triple mash Imperial Stout, who knows. But yeah, it certainly looks the part actually. So I think we don't really need to say anything more about the appearance of this one. We've said all we need to, and it looks exactly as you would expect for a big Imperial Stout. So let's take a closer look at the aroma and just see how we go with this one. I'm very, very curious to see what this beer has in store for us. Yeah. Now I'm going to say straight away, this beer is it's interesting for sure. So I don't think this is a pastry stout, but it's kind of a mix actually. In fairness, there's a few sort of pastry stout type elements coming out of it. This one, it's got a little bit of that kind of savoury backbone to it, but at the same time, you can smell some of the more old school roasty, toasty, and chocolatey elements coming out of this one. And it might well just be that the cocoa nibs are giving you that sort of powdery chocolate thing that they often do, and that's kind of dominating the aroma. But yeah, I've got a feeling that this one might be a little bit of a kind of middle ground between the kind of pastry stouts and the kind of more old school Russian Imperial Stouts. So yeah, I'm curious to see what this one actually gives us in the flavour, but the aroma is certainly very nice, and you can smell that this thing is a big thick bugger of a beer. So yeah, I think we're going to enjoy this one. But let's try and break down the aroma a little bit more and just and describe it a wee bit more succinctly, I guess we could say. But yeah, on the, you know, the backbone of this beer is really nice. I mean, you can smell that you can smell a little bit of a sort of woody backbone to it, I would say. And obviously this beer isn't barrel aged, of course, but you can certainly smell a little bit of that. You know, it certainly gives you a little bit of a woody backbone. There's a lovely sort of kind of brown rye bready type note in there as well, a wee bit of bread crust. Those two things kind of combine together to give you the the overall backbone of this beer. There's one or two nutty elements in there as well, of course, but the nutty and woody elements I think do develop to be more of a kind of undertone. But of course there's a lot of chocolate in this one, and the chocolate's quite interesting. Now for me, overall, I would say that the chocolatey side of this beer gives you maybe a, you know, it maybe gives you somewhere in the region of a kind of 50 to 60% cocoa. It's actually quite sweet in terms of the chocolatey notes, but in fairness, the more that you smell of this one, you start to get a wee bit more of a you do start to get a little bit more of a kind of bitterness to the chocolate. You can smell a little bit of that kind of dry, powdery sort of thing, you know, like that Nesquik powder that you use to make chocolate milk and stuff like that. The beer definitely has a wee bit of an element there, and that stuff smells as if it's maybe more of a kind of 70, maybe 80% cocoa chocolate. So there's a wee bit of a darker chocolate to this beer as well. And yeah, it does smell a wee bit drier in that sense too. So I really like how that goes together in this beer too. So yeah, the chocolate, you know, they still come across as quite sweet, but you get a little bit of that kind of powdered dryness out of it, which I think is great as well. So yeah, that side of things in this beer I think goes together very, very nicely. So yeah, it does work pretty damn well actually. So yeah, chocolatey side of this beer really comes out. I will say that on the sweeter side of the chocolate, on the milkier side of the chocolate, if you like, that's when you get the vanilla out of this one. And the vanilla has a little bit, I don't know if you can describe it as oily, but the vanilla really adds a nice kind of sweetness to this beer. For me, there's also a good bit of brown sugar in here, definitely. So you can smell, it's actually quite well balanced. You definitely get a bit of that kind of treacle molasses sort of thing out of it, but it doesn't come across as being too thick. And that makes me curious about what the length of the wort boil is, because usually when it comes to these beers that are, you know, very, these very big Imperial Stouts, like I say, they tend to use a very long wort boil, but this one, you don't get that characteristic slightly leathery treacly sort of thing out of this one. The treacle molasses is still relatively sweet, if that makes sense, but certainly in the middle of the nose you can smell a big brown sugary element to it. There's a bit of a thicker treacle molasses there, there's a sweeter caramel, and I've also got some nice kind of, there's also some nice kind of toasty brown sugary elements in there as well. So yeah, I really like how this beer goes about its business in that sense. So yeah, the aroma from this one on the brown sugary side of things, I think, is very, very nice. So yeah, the malty backbone of this one, it's done it very, very well. I'm not sure exactly when this one was brewed, but you certainly still get a wee bit of hoppy character out of it. And you know, big imperial stouts at this at 10%, they're not going to be the most hoppy of beers, but I do think there are a few hoppy elements in this one. But we've said all we need to about the kind of malty and adjuncty backbone from this one, that's for sure. But on the hoppy side of things, you get a little bit of earthiness out of it, not too much, but you can smell a little bit of earthy bitterness in there. Some nice bright floral aromaticity, a little bit of a kind of lighter grassy sort of thing to the beer as well, which I can really enjoy. But yeah, a wee bit of grassy zestiness in there, some nice floral aromaticity, and overall a little bit of a kind of earthy, you know, there's a little bit of a sort of earthy bitterness to the beer as well. So I do like how that goes together. But on the fruity side of things, I do get a lot out of this one. It's kind of typical as you'd expect. The more that you smell of this beer, it does give you a wee bit more of that kind of chocolate brownie, cakey sort of thing. So for me, wee bit of chocolate brownie coming out of the beer, but certainly some nice raisiny notes in there, but it's quite an oily raisin. A lot of plum, maybe a little bit of a drier kind of pruny note in there as well. But yeah, nice oily, plummy qualities, which I think are very, very nice. So raisins, plums, a little bit of a lighter kind of figgy note, and also some good kind of blackberry notes as well. So I really like how that goes together in this one. So yeah, big fruity juicy characters coming out of this beer as well, which I really enjoy. So yeah, it goes together very nicely, that's for sure. But I think it's got, as I say, overall a little bit of a kind of sharper, juicier fruit to it. Wee touch of hoppy character, but a lovely big kind of sweet, but still quite smooth backbone. I mean, for an imperial chocolate vanilla stout, which this essentially is, it's really interesting. I would say it leans a little bit more towards the pastry stout side of things, I would say, but you can smell a bit of the more roasty, toasty, well-fired, bread crusty notes towards the back of the nose. We didn't mention those too much actually, but it's more because the notes you get with this tend to be a little bit more kind of bready, and I've always found that pastry stouts give you that kind of granola sort of thing. So I'm really curious to see what this one gives us in terms of the flavour actually. But yeah, I think we can leave it at that for the aroma and have a taste of this one. So yeah, this is the Black Eyed Dog, a 10% Imperial Stout with Madagascan vanilla and Bahian, can we say that? Bahian cocoa nibs. So yeah, I think this will be really interesting. Let's get stuck into this one. Slàinte, skål, cheers, felicidades. There we go. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's pretty damn solid. I'm just going to say thumbs up to Cervejaria Octopus for this one. This is very, very nice. And it certainly builds up. It does kind of bring together a little bit of the pastry stout, but also the kind of Russian Imperial Stout in a sense. This one definitely has a wee bit more roasty toastiness to it. But I like how this one goes about its business. This is worth trying. If you come across this is definitely worth trying. I think my next review from these guys, though, on the basis of how good this one is, it will need to be one of the IPAs to see how they do there. But yeah, I really like how this beer, I really like how it goes about its business. Let's just get the rest of that out and into the glass there. You can look at that, just look how thick that liquid is. Craziness, absolute craziness. But yeah, this beer, It does get a big thumbs up from me. And like I say, it's almost like a hybrid of a pastry stout in a sense, and an old school Russian Imperial Stout. But let's try and break down the flavour for you then and just describe it properly. So, backbone of this beer then, as I was saying, you do get a wee bit of a slightly, I find that the very backbone of this beer is a little bit kind of woody in a sense, so you can feel a little bit of a woody note in the very base layer of this beer, and it kind of goes right down the middle line of your tongue almost. But then on top of that, particularly on the sides of the palate, you can feel like a well-fired, toasty, bread crusty element out of this one. So I do think that this beer actually does give you a bit more bitterness the further that you go into the aftertaste with it. So yeah, on top of that, you've got a kind of roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust. On top of that layer, you can feel a sort of smooth, you can certainly feel a sort of smooth, brown bready element to this one. So I do like how that goes together in this beer too. So it's almost like a kind of rye bready, wholemeal bready base there. And you know, these three layers that I'm talking about, that's the middle third and back third of your palate that you're getting this. So yeah, that's interesting for sure. But if we focus on the middle third of your palate then, so you will notice, as I say, if you go towards the front half of that middle third of your palate, you will feel there are one or two nutty sort of undertones sitting underneath that. No doubt in my mind there. But then on top of the kind of brown bready layer, you can feel the chocolatey layer in this one. So at the back, in the back half of that middle third of your palate, you do get a very strong kind of bitter chocolate note out of this one. But there is this tendency with your palate, of course, the more bitter roasty flavours tend to be found at the back of the palate, and they get progressively sweeter as you go further forward. But yeah. So yeah, the as I say, at the back of that middle third of your palate, as I say, more of a kind of 70-80% bitterness. Probably even, it actually could even be more than that, like an 80-90% cocoa chocolate there. But as you move further forward, it certainly mellows out a little bit. Then as you cross the middle, the dead centre of your palate, you can feel it really starts to get more milky. In the front half of that middle third of your tongue, that is where the vanilla really starts to come out. You get that lovely sort of oily sweetness from the Madagascar vanilla, and the chocolate in there is really milky at that point. You're getting a sort of 40% cocoa chocolate on the front half of that middle third of your tongue. So that's really, really interesting. But sitting on top of this layer, you certainly have more of a kind of you have some of the kind of brown sugary layers in this beer. The thing I'll say about this though is it doesn't, I think it's probably undergone a wort boil of like about 4 hours or something like that. I don't think this one's undergone like a 6, 7, 8 hour boil this, because it's got a big slickness to it, and you can see the liquid is almost sludgy. So I'm wondering, in a sense, is this maybe a double mash, one that's undergone like a 4 hour wort boil? That would be the way that you would get a mouthfeel like this, I think, because it is thick, as I say, but it's not kind of the brown sugars aren't overly thick, and it's usually the brown sugars that you would use in a beer to kind of judge if you were doing it that way. That's how I would do it. I would look at the brown sugary flavours to kind of judge how long the wort boil would be, if I wanted to play a guessing game. Very nerdy, that I know, but yeah, the brown sugars in this one are quite nicely done. So let's focus on that brown sugary element to the beer then. So yeah, on as we say, on top of that chocolatey layer, then that's when you get the brown sugary elements to this beer. And if you go into the dead centre of that middle third of your palate, you can feel there's a nice kind of how would we say? You certainly get a nice kind of sweeter. You get a nice kind of oily. You can feel like the sort of bigger oily, kind of more caramelised, treacly molasses sort of thing there. But it's got a wee element of sweeter caramel to it as well, which is quite interesting. But as you move further out from the centre in that middle third of your palate, there is certainly a more kind of roasty, toasty, brown sugary element there. And as I say, towards the back of that middle third of your palate, there's more of a kind of you start to get more of the kind of bitter roasty elements coming out of the beer too. So there's a good spectrum of this, and I think in a lot of ways this beer is quite straight shooting. You know, you've got, you know, bread crust, that kind of thing. You've got your chocolatey layer. You've got a bit of vanilla in there. You've got the brown sugar sitting on top of that. It is, you know, quite straight shooting in a lot of ways, this beer, but it's just one of these ones that's really, really well crafted. And yeah, it really does join the board. It really does kind of sit on the border between a pastry stout, I think, and a Russian Imperial Stout. But I think that covers, I think that's everything we really need to say about the middle third of the palate in this one. Let's focus on the back third of your palate then. So border region between middle third and back third of your palate. Again, you get a bit of a bready build up in there, like a toasty, well-fired bread crust, of course. Then in the back third of your palate, like I say, there's a roasty, well-fired bread crust backbone, a bit of brown bread in there, a bit of a slightly sweet, you know, slightly, you can feel that gets gradually sweeter as you go up, and then on top of that you've got a more airy, bready sort of thing coming out of the beer as well. So I really like how this beer kind of pieces itself together in a sense. So yeah, some interesting stuff with this beer for sure. So yeah, the when you at the back third of your palate, I say that the roasty toasty elements are a lot more kind of they're a lot more kind of defined, if you like. There's a lot more kind of roasty toasty well fired grain on the back of your, on the back turn of your on the back part of your palate. So yeah, the nice base, that roasty toasty well fired base of the on the back third of your palate is a lot more apparent. So yeah, but when you start from the back of your palate, you can feel the flavour is distinctly taller, and as you come further forward, it just condenses down a wee bit as you go into the middle third of your palate, and then all those flavours are just a little bit more sort of squashed together in a sense. But yeah, again, I really like how this this part of the beer goes together. So yeah, the malty side of this one is quite interesting, as I say, but quite straight shooting in some ways. It's got everything you'd expect from the type of beer that this one is, but it certainly is just one of these ones that strikes you as being very, very well crafted. So yeah, on the hoppy side of things then, so back corners of the palate with this beer, you can feel there is a nice little bit of a roasty toasty earthiness in there, and as you move further forward it gives you a little bit of a herbal character, and then as you push forward towards the kind of front corners of the palate, it's got a little bit more of you know, it's got a little bit more of a floral aromaticity. But as I say, these Imperial Stouts are not the most hop forward of styles. Take that, you know, just be aware of that with these beers. They are not the most hop forward of styles, and this one has been sitting in my fridge for maybe about 2-3 months, something like that, and I'm not sure how long Beer Dome had it either. But yeah, certainly a bit of a hoppy, earthy bitterness in the back corners of the palate, a wee bit herbal there, and the sort of remnants of there's a sort of a little bit of a remnant of the kind of floral aromaticity there. Then round the front curve of the palate, it's just a little bit lighter and grassy, but the grassiness has a little bit of smoothness in there as well, which I can certainly appreciate. So yeah, I like how this one goes together. It gets a thumbs up from me in that sense. The green component of this one is quite nice, but also quite smooth, I would say. So yeah, front third of your palate then, and the fruity side of things. So again, border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you get a little bit of a bready build up in there, a toasty, well-fired bread crusty note on the outside of it, but the base of that front third of your palate, you can feel a bit of the kind of bread crust underneath and a bit of the smooth brown bread, and you've also got some of those, as I say, you also have some of those brown bready. You get some of those kind of more brown bready, yeasty notes out of it too, which I really like. So yeah, it's the backbone of this one I think suits the fruity notes that sit on top of it. At the back of the front third of your palate, it almost gives you a sort of well-fired chocolate brownie cakey kind of thing. Then on top of that, you've got that nice oily bubble where the juicy esters roll their way out of the beer. So let's focus on that then. Let's focus on those fruity esters. So yeah, sitting on top of that, there's a nice little bit of a kind of, there's a nice little bit of a raisiny note in there. There's a kind of juicy, plummy note underneath, Oh, pardon me, a little bit of a juicy kind of plummy element in there. And it's not actually as oily and as sweet in a sense as I thought it was going to be, because there are a few dried elements, a few dried fruity elements there as well. This beer, the fruity side of it actually leans a lot more towards the kind of front half of that front third of your palate, which is quite interesting. But yeah, as I say, a bit of raisin there, bit of a kind of juicy plum, and a wee bit of a more kind of dry, pruny sort of thing, and a wee bit of a datey quality. But then as you go forward on the beer, you get a nice, juicy, and slightly oily figgy note and a wee bit of black currant there. But on the front tip of your tongue, you get a lovely kind of more oily blackberry note out of this. I'd be very curious to know what hop they've used in this one, but it certainly gives you a lovely oily blackberry kind of thing that lingers into the aftertaste. Could it be a little bit of Eureka or something like that? I don't know. Maybe there's some Brazilian hops that give you these red fruity notes I've not encountered yet, but lovely, lovely beer. This one, you can see the little bits of particulate matter just sitting on the edge of the glass here, and the glass is sweating because of the lovely Swedish summer that we're having. But overall, this beer is really quite interesting. As I said, it straddles the line between a pastry stout and a kind of old, a Russian Imperial Stout actually. So yeah, thumbs up to them for this. Let's round off the review with the mouthfeel then. So overall, I would say this beer, it's definitely full-bodied. Yeah, it's kind of sort of in the middle of the road of full-bodied for me. It's pushing towards the top though, I would say. It is one of the thicker ones that I've come across recently. It's not, as I say, the thickest stouts I've come across are the Scandinavian Imperial Stouts. I think it's very difficult to beat their thickness, but this one isn't far away. I will say that. The Brazilian Imperial Stouts have not been far away from the Scandinavian ones in terms of thickness, that's for sure. But yeah, in terms of the overall beer, it's like a big, thick it's like a really big, thick, smooth, oily kind of thing that you get out of this beer. It's very, very nice. So the hoppy bitterness out of this one, and bitterness generally, I would say that this beer is maybe about 70 IBUs, something like that. But always take my IBU counts with a pinch of salt. This is my weakest point of beer reviewing. But yeah, there's a mix of bitterness from the malty backbone and from the hoppy side of things. I would say about 70 IBUs in this beer potentially. The malty backbone has a bit of smoothness to it, a nice little bit of kind of sweetness in there as well. And yeah, I do like how that goes together. Yeah, nice, as I say, nice big kind of hoppy bitterness, a bit of a kind of malty bitterness in there as well. Smooth malty character, bit of sweetness too, and the adjuncts, of course. The vanilla gives you a bit of a milkier chocolate note out of this one. So yeah, bread, chocolate, and then brown sugar, I think, and a bit of vanilla mixed in there too. It's really nice how that goes together. But the fruity side of the beer, I very much like. A little bit of an oily character and a wee bit of a kind of sharpness to it as well. But yeah, a big thumbs up to Cervejaria Octopus for this. They've pulled off a really interesting beer here. Quite straight shooting in a lot of ways, but it's one of these ones that I feel is just very, very well crafted. So yeah, it makes me curious to try a few of their other things. So maybe a barley wine from these guys would be an interesting prospect as well. I don't know if they've done one, but yeah, I think we can round off this review there. So yeah, this one was the Black Eyed Dog, an Imperial Stout at 10% ABV with Bahian Cocoa Nibs and Madagascan Vanilla from Cervejaria Octopus, a gypsy brewery based between Belo, Horizonte and Minas Gerais and Rio de Janeiro, a little bit further north. But yeah, thank you again for watching my reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Cervejaria Octopus as well, and hopefully we can return to these guys at some point soon. But thank you again for watching. Check out my social media, check out Cervejaria Octopus, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Slange, skull, cheers. We still have another 2 Brazilian beers to look at fairly soon. Cheers just now.